often always talk about an overabundance of nutrition in terms of calories. If someone comes into the clinic because they can't lose weight, the number 2 reasons are really...
Meet Jess Zadra, a functional medicine nutritionist who's helped thousands of patients at the Caplan Health Institute. I wanted to talk with Jess to learn what role nutritional deficiencies play in our ability to lose weight. She also shares from her 10,000 hours of clinical practice the biggest reasons people can't lose weight.
I see this all the time where people are quote unquote doing all the right things on the hamster wheel, wasting your time, energy, money, but not really getting anywhere.
And we get her expert opinion on weight loss supplements and hacks. All of those weight loss supplements, are there any that actually work? Can nutrient deficiencies affect somebody's ability to lose weight?
100%. And there are multiple ways in which this may happen. It's more likely to be a cascading event. So when we look at nutrient deficiencies, which like Justin said, we're going to talk more about, it's not as if a B vitamin deficiencies causes you to gain weight. But what does happen is that there's a lot of nutrients that are involved in certain processes, whether that's glucose metabolism, energy production. They're involved in hormone production. So ultimately, if we have certain deficiencies, then this can lead to a hard time or a challenge losing weight for a lot of various different reasons.
This is exactly why I wanted to chat with you, because I'm certainly not an expert on either of these topics. Like, I've never been tested for nutrient deficiencies. I only take maybe a couple of supplements here and there. And Jess, you're a clinical nutritionist, right? So that means you work with patients in a practice every day.
Correct, yes. And yes,
Okay.
we do use a lot of supplements, but when we're doing so, we're always doing it to essentially bring the body back into balance and to resolve basically a root cause of why someone is coming in to see us.
That's perfect, because the first thing I think of, right, when a health expert or especially like a weight loss coach starts pushing supplements, I immediately think, well, yeah, they just want more of my money, right? But is there an actual need for supplements for certain people?
Yeah, so it's not just for certain people. And here's the thing. I compare to so many people in my profession, in my practice, like, you don't want to know how much people come into like the clinic or office with like boxes of supplements, right? Most of the time people are over supplementing. They don't understand what's doing what. They're taking things just because. And so supplements do have a role today. And that's really because there are so many factors that go into how basically our bodies are today versus how they were hundreds of years ago. And then also just environmental factors where it's very, very hard for us to get all of the nutrients that we need from food alone. So that's one factor, right? And then we have completely different health issues than we did before. So we have basically a society of chronic disease right now. When we have chronic disease, many of these root causes of chronic disease are nutrition related. And though we often always talk about an overabundance of nutrition in terms of calories, we're still oftentimes very deficient in micronutrients. So these would be like our vitamins and minerals. And when we have issues with this, we can often have, once again, a cascading effect with certain conditions and chronic diseases. And this basically increases our need for certain nutrients. So this is really where supplements come into play. It's going to be very, very individualized person by person, but I am really skeptical of supplements as well. And you know, I don't like prescribe to any brand. If you're ever wondering if someone you're working with is just like trying to sell you supplements, most natural medicine providers that I've worked with, you know, we use a variety of different brands and different things depending upon what's going on with someone. It's not as if we're trying to sell you this line of supplements. And if you take all of these supplements, it's just going to cure all of your problems, right? Like, that is, you can basically put in line with like snake oil and just walk away from that. If you don't have a specific reason that you either are seeing on a test, like why you should be taking something, or you don't believe that something is helping you, those are the two things that I say, right? Because like if you are taking a supplement because you think it's going to help with your hair or something, hair, skin, and nails, and you truly see those side effects, whether it's placebo or not, you have a reason to keep taking it, right? If you are taking something because you got a lab test done and there's an indication for something, then there's a reason for you to be taking it. Other than those two things, if there's not a reason, then I would highly recommend looking at that more closely.
This is the perfect time to tell you guys about my hair, skin, and nail supplement that I just came out with. I'm just kidding. But let's go back to something that you mentioned when it comes to nutrient deficiencies. You mentioned that the diet, kind of the nutrition that we're currently in, we're not capable of getting all of our vitamins and minerals, the micronutrients as you called them, from our diet. What do you think the reason for that is?
Oh my gosh, there's so many reasons. But here's the thing. We have to go back a little bit to even understand this, because we did used to die from nutrition deficiency diseases. Okay, so basically there was scurvy with vitamin C.
Right.
There was beriberi, thiamine B1 deficiencies, things like vitamin D deficiencies cause things like rickets. So essentially serious bone malformation and inability for growth in children. So the RDA, and this is all going to make sense, but the reason why the RDA was developed was to actually prevent deficiency diseases. Okay, so the amount of nutrients that we're supposed to be consuming on a daily basis, when you look at a food and the label on the back where you're meeting certain percentages, or you're looking at a supplement or something, that's based on the RDA, and the RDA is intended to prevent deficiency diseases. It's not intended to be for optimal levels of health. And as time goes on in nutrition science, we understand this more and more. So we're kind of on this spectrum of okay, before we were just trying to prevent people dying from nutrient deficiencies, right? So we're at this place now where we've been able to do that most of the time. Although in other cultures and in other countries, some of these things are still a very big deal, like protein deficiencies in Africa and in certain places that still have thyroid nodules and things from not getting enough iodine. So these things do still happen in a lot of other places. But we're on a spectrum of okay, we've cured deficiency diseases, but that doesn't mean that we're still at a level in which we're receiving all of the nutrients that we need to support what is optimal health. What is that? No one really knows these days. We continue to learn more and more information, but we are now in a state of, we were mentioning earlier, going back to, of chronic disease. People aren't dying in their 20s and 30s from infectious diseases. We're basically dying from chronic disease. And with chronic disease, once again, there's a lot of nutritional components at play. So we've moved from, dying from nutritional deficiency diseases to basically what I would consider the RDA is bare minimum of getting by. If we're talking about optimal health, the scary part is that most people can't even meet the RDA requirements. So even though we don't know, for example, what an optimal level of a nutrient should be for every single nutrient, because there's a lot of different research and a lot of people argue about certain things, and we can definitely talk about specific nutrients and I can give you examples. The point is that even just to cure a deficiency disease, a lot of people are not meeting that through food alone. And if you're interested in this, I have a video that's can you get all of your nutrients from your diet alone? And I actually go through a day in the life where I tracked my own food, because people think oh, as a nutritionist, you know what to eat. And that may be true, but I spent a day where I'm going to eat a really nutrient dense diet today. I'm going to have a hearty breakfast, a really big salad for lunch with all these things. I'm going to have steak and vegetables for dinner. And I show you how on Chronometer, I still didn't meet all of the requirements for a few minerals, a few B vitamins. And so it's a lot more challenging than people think if you're not taking at least a multivitamin to kind of give you a little bit of a buffer with some of these nutrients.
And remind me, we'll link that video in the description of this one, the one where you tried to get all of your nutrients in one day. You cracked me up too, because it's funny. But let's go back to, you said most people can't even meet the RDA requirements. What are the top, let's just keep it to 3 because there's so many. What are the top 3 most common nutrient deficiencies that you see on a day-to-day basis in your practice?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Is vitamin D a nutrient? Okay, so like if we're talking about labs, so vitamin D, for everyone knows, it actually functions more like a hormone in your body than a nutrient. And there's not a lot of foods that we actually get vitamin D in. So it's more of a hormone that we get from the sun, essentially. But in terms of just like looking at people's labs, like everyone is normally vitamin D deficient or has suboptimal levels. And that goes into these, we're talking about certain nutrients and why we don't get enough of them in our life. There's like environmental factors. Vitamin D is a clear example of just how most people don't spend enough time in the sun these days. There's a lot of factors that go into it in terms of like where you actually live and how close you are to the equator. There's genetic factors. We haven't even talked about genetics yet that basically influence like vitamin D uptake and vitamin D receptors and things like that. So like vitamin D is number one nutrient, but I don't always count that because like I said, it's more of a hormone. But if you're talking about just what shows up on labs where it's like, as so many people have that, that's one of them. B vitamins are another one. And I say B vitamins because B vitamins is a huge class of vitamins, but all of the different B vitamins show up in different ways. And a lot of people have a hard time essentially metabolizing their B vitamins, which are genetic factors, which gives them kind of a subclinical B vitamin deficiency, even if they are consuming foods with B vitamins. So that goes back to some genetic factors. And then just one that I see a lot, if I'm being honest, is omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fatty acids are an essential fatty acid, which means you have to get them through your diet. Our bodies don't make or synthesize this. And if you don't eat fish, then you're not getting omega-3 fats. And it's pretty surprising how many people don't really eat fish. They're not really taking a fish oil supplement. And then there's the whole kind of vegan conspiracy theory. I'm sorry, it's not a conspiracy theory, but basically the idea that some of these nuts and seeds have omega-3 fats, and they do have omega-3 fats, but this is ALA, alpha linoleic acid, and this has to be converted into EPA and DHA, and there's like a bunch of steps in this conversion. It's not very efficient, so it's not a direct source of EPA and DHA, which are the fats that we really need. And so if you're not consuming fish and you're not taking like an algae supplement, that's what like vegans or vegetarians would do, then oftentimes you're deficient in omega-3 fats. So I would say those are probably like the top three.
I feel like I just passed a quiz. I'm back in 8th grade and I just passed the quiz because those three that you mentioned, I said like I'd only take like a handful of supplements here and there. Those are them right there.
And those are the supplements a lot of people take, like B vitamins, vitamin D, and omega-3 fats, because it's hard to get all these things a lot of times through food.
I take vitamin D because I'm pasty and I've got Irish and German genetics. So like if I go out in the sun, I just burn anyway and the sun doesn't shine in the winter. And then I take fish oil simply because my wife hates when I cook fish all the time and she won't eat it. So, yeah. Maybe I had read it when I did all of my training in nutrition. I just didn't retain it, that vitamin D acts like a hormone. Obviously, hormones are crucially tied to somebody's ability to lose weight and, of course, to your overall health. So if somebody's struggling to lose weight, let's say they're doing everything the right way, right? They're doing everything perfectly. And they're thinking that perhaps the reason they're not able to lose weight might be because of a nutrient deficiency. How might that show up in their life?
That's a really good question. And I'm actually going to back that up a little bit to the first thing that you said. So if someone comes into the clinic because they can't lose weight, they're like, I see this all the time where people are quote unquote doing all the right things, right? They call, they're stressed out. They're like, I'm eating, just a few sprigs of lettuce and like I exercise all the time. And I'm like, actually, I mean, not that that's a good example of what you want to be doing, but I'm saying I see the whole spectrum of people that, are doing the right things and can't lose weight. And for us, we're always trying to identify, well, what are those root cause factors, right? And so for weight, I think it would be helpful for us to talk about the most common root cause factors of basically, inability to lose weight, because then we can understand how nutrients are involved in all of these factors, okay? Yeah. So the number 2 reasons are really hormones, like you mentioned. So, if average female, whether it's like my age in their 30s or maybe they're perimenopausal, menopausal, etc. If there's like something off with someone's hormones, that's going to be a huge hindrance to weight loss. So especially if, for example, someone is estrogen dominant, they got too much estrogen going on, like that's going to be very, very hard to lose any weight. It's going to be like a number 1 factor. Even if we do all the other things, if we can't help someone metabolize that estrogen and balance out their hormones, it's probably not going to happen for them. And then the other underlying factor is really insulin resistance. Okay, so basically that doesn't have to mean that you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, but it's just a pattern of insulin resistance. And those are probably the number 2 reasons why people can't lose weight. And then the other one is a combination of just different certain health conditions, autoimmune disorders, where the body is just so busy with all these other things that are taking place that like whatever weight is there is basically like survival mechanisms, right? And there's just so much inflammation in the body that the body is not gonna allow you to lose weight, because when we have a ton of inflammation in the body and a ton of stress, the body wants to like hold on to excess pounds because it's for survival. If we're talking about hormones, nutrition is incredibly important. Some of the ones we just talked about, like omega-3 fats, we have a hard time basically with certain precursors that we need for hormones. If we don't have enough fat, saturated fat is actually like the foundation of steroid hormones, so that can be problematic. And then there can be a lot of things that are nutrition related that unfortunately will further disturb someone's hormones, whether that's like consuming a lot of foods that have phytoestrogens in it, or essentially like BPAs and things that mess up your hormones. So there's a lot of things with nutrition where if you're not eating a good, well-rounded whole foods diet, you could potentially be making certain imbalances worse. We need foundational nutrients in order to have like proper hormone synthesis for all of these things. And then insulin resistance, there is a lot of micronutrients and minerals involved in glucose metabolism. So minerals like magnesium and chromium are incredibly important for glucose metabolism. And so whether you are lacking in these nutrients and therefore have a cascading effect where your metabolism slows, or you are someone who is diabetic already, has been for years, you're not going to have as much of these nutrients because basically they're getting burned through, they're getting utilized in a process that's trying to use these things. Magnesium is a really common one where like we were talking about the difference between not dying of nutritional deficiencies and optimal intake of something. Magnesium is something that we haven't really measured what would be an optimal intake, but we burn through magnesium when we're stressed, and the amount of like stress that most people live under these days, whether it's just psychological stress or like their daily life stress, they're living in a certain state, most people probably need more magnesium than they think they do. And then magnesium is involved in over 300 different enzymatic reactions. So if you think about a nutrient like that and not having enough, or having enough but it's just getting utilized so much, and that we burn through more when we're stressed, that's going to have a cascading effect on all these things that are involved in glucose metabolism. So I would say those are the primary ways in which micronutrients are involved in glucose metabolism. If you don't have good glucose metabolism, that's going to lead to insulin resistance, and then that's going to lead to weight gain, having a hard time losing weight.
A lot of the individuals that I've coached, we get them lab work done and they do come back as insulin resistant pre-diabetic, right? Like HA1C between 5.7 and, 6.4. I don't quote me on that because I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert.
No,
But
those are the right numbers. Yeah,
boom,
those are the.
yes, I passed my second quiz.
Those are the traditional reference ranges. But I will let you know, just because someone, once again, is not in that range, they're not technically pre-diabetic, someone can still, they can have a normal A1C, but if you look at their insulin, if they're pumping out insulin, they're likely still insulin resistant, and it just hasn't caught up to like their A1C yet, if that makes sense. So, I mean, looking at insulin, glucose and A1C is important. And then there's so much opinions out there in terms of like what is actually the best testing for blood sugar, and we don't need to get into all of that, but I mean, that's a basic place for people to start. And if you're already having issues there, then there's definitely like some work that can be done in that area.
Maybe I'd heard it before, but I hadn't retained it. I didn't know it, at least, that magnesium and chromium, if you're insulin resistant, then you're going to be burning through these a lot quicker than if
and
you
B vitamins.
And
B vitamins.
Interesting.
Yeah.
If I'm insulin resistant, I'm having trouble losing weight because every time I eat, essentially my insulin's higher than it should normally be, so I'm storing a bunch of extra body fat. Is supplementing with magnesium and chromium and B vitamins going to suddenly make me start to lose weight?
No, but here's the thing. No supplement is a magic pill for lifestyle changes that got you to somewhere in the first place, if that makes sense. So let's say you are the person that's doing all the right things. You're eating a healthy diet, you're exercising, and like you just didn't know this thing was going on. You have a few things that are off. Then you find a supplement that's going to target it. You're still doing everything else. 100% that should help. And that's the whole point of the supplement. You can't just like take a supplement and then, you know, continue to like not exercise or basically not address your food and expect that to change. So you brought up a really good example. There's like several supplements that we use for patients that are insulin resistant. One of them is more like, it's kind of like a multivitamin, but then it essentially just has extra glucose support for people. So it's going to have more of some of those minerals. You want to take something that's formulated for something specifically. So yeah, there are a lot of like metabolism support supplements out there that are going to have higher amounts of certain micro minerals. They're going to have more B vitamins. There might be some herbs in there that help with glucose metabolism. All those things on their own aren't going to fix your insulin resistance, but it's going to help support your journey of you doing all the other right things. And then you likely will see really good results.
There's no supplement, there's the magic pill. I think deep down we all know that, right? We're still hoping that one comes out. It's going to be the miracle weight loss pill, and I can eat whatever I want and just take this pill. But the way that you phrased it is they'll support you in your journey. You mentioned, you know, glucose support. I've heard and read different things, you know, apple cider vinegar, cinnamon bark, berberine. Are those actually effective supplements for glucose control in your experience, in your opinion?
They are. So the thing with all of these things and why certain physicians use certain high grade formulations is because a lot of these things need to be in a high enough dose to have clinical efficacy. Whereas if we just like take a shot of apple cider vinegar. So here's the thing with apple cider vinegar. If you're doing that to reduce your blood sugar response for a specific meal, that actually does work. There's all of these glucose hacks, like, you know, the glucose goddess is huge for all these hacks. And it's like, they legit work. I'm not saying that they don't work, but it's like, are you going to spend your life just relying on all these hacks? Like maybe if you're someone that comes in and their glucose is so out of control that in addition to what we're doing, all of these hacks can be really helpful to get things under control. But like the hacks on its own still, once again, won't be a cure-all. So these things can help. We just have to like be realistic about it and be like, am I going to have apple cider vinegar with every single meal for the rest of my life? I don't know. But it does work. It does help, okay? It can help if you take it fasting in the morning. I did that as an experiment when I was wearing a CGM that we were like using on people in the clinic. and it did help in the morning. It was interesting. And then some of the things that you mentioned, the herbs like cinnamon, yes. And then berberine is probably the most popular one, right? Berberine is very strong. It does work really well. Berberine also has other effects. And we should talk about this with all supplements, is that they are not free from having interactions, side effects, etc. Nutrients, you can not only overdose on them, but sometimes you can throw off other nutrients if you're taking them in ranges that just don't make sense with each other. And then herbs are very, very strong, and herbs have a lot of different compounds similar to drugs, which is what makes them effective, but they also have side effects as well. So a lot of things aren't just, for a lot of reasons, certain herbs won't be appropriate for people, especially if they are on a lot of medications. That's something that you always want to take into consideration. And then something like berberine, it just has other effects other than bringing down glucose. Most of them are really good. We look at it and you're like, well, who wouldn't want all of these things? Like help with like, fungus and like bacteria and things like that. But it just is important to know that it does more than just bring down glucose. And then so it's not something that I would ever recommend someone would take like absolutely indefinitely. It would be for like a period of time to help like once again bring things down, and then someone could maintain those results with their diet, their lifestyle, etc.
Yeah, that's perfect. You just said that because like as you're explaining all of these different positive effects of berberine, it's like, maybe I should be taking berberine. But that was going to be my next question. It's like, okay, I'm not insulin resistant, right? Like I just had my blood work done 2 weeks ago and it's perfect. So I guess your answer would be don't take berberine. You don't need to take berberine.
I mean, here's the thing. I have some berberine. And like, I will take it every once in a while if I'm eating way more carbs than I normally eat. And I just think like, maybe it will help. But it's not something, once again, that I need to be taking all the time. I do that more so because I'm someone that I don't eat a lot of carbohydrates. So if, for example, I do, then I kind of feel like my body could use the extra support, or else it's going to be a little bit thrown off. But I wouldn't want someone on it every single day, every single meal, unless like someone put them on it and gave them like a time period for expectations on, once again, doing blood work, seeing results, making sure it's not having other effects, etc.
Too, you mentioned CGM a couple of times. So if somebody's listening to this, like, what's a CGM? Constant glucose monitor. I actually read an article, I don't know, maybe a week ago, that said they're going to be, CGMs, constant glucose monitors, are going to be available now without a prescription pretty soon here, if they're not already, which I think is going to be a game changer for a lot of people. Like, you will not have to go to a doctor to get one of these prescribed. You can actually, I mean, you'll still need to learn how to interpret the results and read it, but it's going to give you a lot more control and power over seeing what different foods and how they affect your own body.
Yeah, so the continuous glucose monitors, they are available right now. The thing about them is you have to be like diabetic, have a pretty bad blood sugar picture already for your insurance to cover continuous glucose monitors. So that's kind of the differentiation there. There are private companies like Levels and Nutrisense and a few others where you can pay for a continuous glucose monitor, but they're not cheap. Like basically they're third-party services, and you have to pay them like a monthly subscription or something like that to be able to like wear one of these things. And yeah, they're not cheap. And so definitely the more mainstream they become without needing a prescription for insurance coverage and all these things, or just honestly, the more competition there is in like private markets for that, the more that this becomes normal, the more it's going to become available. And then, yeah, it's super interesting to just kind of see how all those things affect you on a personal level.
Well, yeah, and I've read too that there's even some, wearables like smartwatches and stuff that measure glucose levels, but I've heard that they're like terribly inaccurate. Can you confirm that?
I am not a glucometer scientist, so I will not. But what I can tell you is even the CGMs aren't as accurate as you would probably like them to be, meaning that like Sometimes people will put them on, they'll get all these crazy warnings and stuff saying that they're like basically having these crazy blood sugar plummets, but you're supposed to calibrate it with an actual finger prick glucometer. And sometimes it takes a few days for it to kind of calibrate, right? So I could imagine that something just like a watch would probably not be super accurate, but like who's to say? I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, with measuring anything, it's never 100% accurate, right? But it's giving you something to compare it to. It's like yesterday, this is what my blood sugar looked like after breakfast. Now I'm going to eat this today, and it's actually lower. So now I have an idea. I was like, okay, this might be a better option than this. Does it matter what the exact number is? Probably not. I mean, unless you're on medication, but it just gives you something to compare it to.
100%. I'm always telling people when I review their data before we meet, I'm looking for trends is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for trends in their habits or certain things. Like I had a patient who like first thing in the morning was just skyrocketing. And that's like the worst day to start off your day for like blood sugar. And she like swore to me like she was just having coffee. And I'm like, well, coffee can like raise it for some people, but it shouldn't raise it this much. And we went through everything and she thought she was having a nut pod, but then it was actually like a sweetened nut pod. You know what I mean? So it's like, we're looking for patterns that then can help us like resolve like an issue that we don't know is happening. Not necessarily like an exact number, like you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at me because you said nut pod twice, and I'm like, I have no idea what a nut pod is. And for some reason,
what a nut pod is?
No, and for some reason, every time I do an interview on this channel, nuts come up. I swear. Like I'm always talking about nuts. I don't know what a nut pod is. What's a nut pod?
A nut pod is like the most popular non-dairy alternative creamer that like doesn't contain sugar. So it's basically, and the reason why they're so popular is because they're everywhere. So it's not like you have to go to a health food store. I saw nut pod at like 7-Eleven a few weeks ago. And so, but it's like they're really good stuff. It's not like a non-dairy creamer that's Coffee Mate that still has all this crap in it. It's basically just like almonds, coconut, you know,
filtered water.
Yeah, filtered water. And like you can pretty much get them everywhere now. And so they should be unsweetened, but I guess there are a few ones now that like they make sweetened or something. So
you got to make those nut pods taste good.
Yeah.
All right, Jess, $1 million question for you. All of those weight loss supplements, fat burners, are there any that actually work?
I think going back to the conversation about it being an avenue to support you, I think a lot of them can work, but you have to measure that against your expectation of how it's working and what it's doing. If something claims to like burn your fat by taking a supplement, it's probably not going to work. Apple cider vinegar does not burn your fat. It helps with digestion, and a lot of the times that's why people feel like they're thinner, their stomach is smaller because they're not as bloated, they're not retaining as much water, so it can have that effect. Is there a supplement that would 100% help? Yes and no. I don't know. There's not a good way to answer that.
At the end of the day, there's new fat burners that come out all of the time. And if you look at the ingredients, I mean, not all of them, but most of them are just glorified caffeine, right? So they're claiming that they have a thermogenic effect. They raise your metabolism by raising your inner body temperature and, you know, raising your heart rate. And there might be some truth to that, but I've always told people, like, don't buy the expensive caffeine pills. Just drink coffee.
Yeah.
It's cheaper.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask you because you're way more into the weight loss field. So you've probably seen more crazy weight loss supplements than I have. So like, what is the like craziest weight loss supplement that you've ever seen?
I haven't seen any like absolutely crazy ones. Like, most of the ones that I see that I'm highly skeptical of, you know, the fat burners, the torch body fat. And like I said, it's mostly just caffeine, like an excessive amount of caffeine. The same as like some of those crazy pre-workout powders where it's like 400 milligrams of caffeine per dose, and you take it and you feel like you just smoked crack. It's terrible.
And let's talk about that, because here's the thing. We're talking about how supplements, like we have this idea because they're supplements, they're not going to cause us any harm. If you're taking a ton of caffeine, you are raising your cortisol levels pretty significantly. And cortisol, high cortisol levels leads to belly fat, stubborn belly fat, and an increase in your insulin. That's how. I don't know. It's weird that something's intended for something can actually end up being a hindrance towards that thing, because it's just throwing so many things off.
Yeah. And in terms of the other crazy supplements I see, it's not that the supplements themselves are crazy, it's the marketing for them that's crazy. Fake research, ingredients that aren't proven to actually do anything in humans. And so it mostly comes down to the marketing, giving people this false hope that if they take this pill, they'll start to lose weight and they don't have to change anything else other than just take this pill.
Yeah, that's a shame. And marketing is so good. It gets us all when we're like desperate and we're seeking for a solution and an answer. It's so easy to want to be like, oh my gosh, is this thing going to be it? But if we step back and look at things a little bit, we can generally, if we can reason our way like out of something, it's probably the right instance. So I'll even give you a personal example. I've struggled with hair loss a lot over the past 5 years. And me, I'm like a biohacker. Like I'm going to biohack my way out of this, take every nutraceutical for it. The things that ended up being the most helpful were actually not supplement related at all. But the example that I want to give you about this is that the hair supplement that everyone takes that's the most popular is called Nutrafol. I'm not here to say anything bad about Nutrafol, but my multivitamin has way more and better things in it than this Nutrafol. But then over a year, when all of my desperation, it finally got to me where I was like, should I just try this? Because it seems to be working for everyone else, right? And so I did it for 2 months, and then I came to my senses. I'm actually missing things from my multivitamin now that is more supportive of healthy hormones, hair, skin, and nails, all this stuff. So I went back to my multivitamin. I'm way happier with that. But I'm just saying that even for me, sometimes things get to you, I'm looking at something from someone that I've helped formulate supplements before, and I know more about this than probably, most of the average person. And I still get caught up in marketing sometimes just because it's the thing that's been the most proven for all this stuff. But if it doesn't apply to you, then it doesn't really apply to you, I have patients come in all the time what do you think about these juice pills or juice gummies or whatever? And they have all these claims, and it's well, maybe for someone taking that's not eating any fruit and vegetables, that is going to help them, right? Maybe they're straight up getting some micronutrients that they weren't getting. So back to me in the hair example, for someone else that's nutrient deficient, maybe they're taking that and it is helping because they were actually deficient in all those things. But if for someone like me who's not, it's probably not going to do anything for me. So that's what I mean by a lot of the times when it comes to things like weight, we need to look at what is the root cause and why is this happening? Because we need to be addressing that, whether that's in supplemental form with our diet, with our lifestyle, or et cetera. Otherwise, you're just kind of on the hamster wheel, wasting your time, energy, money, not really getting anywhere.
I've heard that supplements and nutrients and vitamins, whatever is in them, that our bodies don't absorb them as well as they absorb nutrients and vitamins from real food. Is that true?
Totally depends on the nutrient. There are so many different forms of vitamins and minerals. So there are definitely forms that are more bioavailable than others. But one thing that is we were just talking about marketing and how sometimes that can kind of skew things. What's interesting is some of these whole food vitamins, they actually aren't going to necessarily work as well as maybe some other ones because they are essentially just saying that because they're grinding down a whole foods powder and adding that to a nutrient that's going to help with the delivery or make you think that it's a whole food. It's not really how things work, and that hasn't really been proven at all. And then it's likely going to be forms of a nutrient that aren't as bioavailable as maybe what would have been in another multivitamin, if that makes sense. So it completely depends upon the nutrient. A really good example of this is like vitamin C. There's so many kinds of vitamin C, like liposomal vitamin C, certain like acerola cherries and ester C and all these things that they claim that their bioavailability is better. But when we do studies on it, it's basically the same as absorbic acid. So essentially...
Which is way cheaper. Way cheaper.
Exactly. Absorbic acid is absorbic acid is absorbic acid. Yeah. So basically, it's like we try all these things. And so that's going to be the case for each individual nutrient. There's not like, for each nutrient, there might be forms that are like kind of crappy, you're not going to absorb a lot, and then there's going to be forms that are much better. So when we're talking about the amount that we absorb from a supplement versus a food, the reason why we only absorb a certain amount from a supplement is either because of the form and because our bodies can only uptake so much of a certain nutrient. When we're eating something from a food, it's in a much smaller amount, so we're likely going to absorb most all of that. Whereas if it's a supplement, we're probably only going to get like a certain percentage, could be 50, could be 60, could be 70, could be 20, because we only uptake a certain amount of nutrient, certain amount of that nutrient at once, essentially.
You're limited by how much your body can actually absorb.
Yeah.
But when you take it in a massive dose, you're still limited by how much your body can actually absorb it at any given moment.
Yeah, we were just talking about vitamin C. Vitamin C is super interesting. I have a video on vitamin C, and I go through how we talk about what is the RDA for vitamin C. We talk about what is probably the optimal intake based on some studies, and then we go through how you would get that optimal intake. And vitamin C is very interesting, more so than other nutrients, where you only absorb a few hundred milligrams at once, okay? So basically what that means is if we're trying to shoot for 400 milligrams of vitamin C, then we're likely going to have to either get that between like multiple different meals, because we can't just eat a bunch of vitamin C at once. We won't uptake it. And then same with supplements. If we're taking just a mega dose of like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, we're just going to excrete most of it. Why would I buy this 1,000 milligram vitamin C? I'd be better off getting, a few hundred milligrams and doing that multiple times a day, or kind of just considering that when I take things. So it really is just dependent upon each nutrient.
All right, we mentioned your YouTube channel a couple of times. Like I said, a couple of times too. We'll link that video in there. We'll link up your YouTube channel in the description of this video as well. But besides going to your YouTube channel, is there anywhere else that somebody could get into contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much live on YouTube these days. That's why I'm friends with Justin, because like you will find me on Instagram. I'm just not as active over there right now. I'm actually trying to do more like community posts and stuff on YouTube, and I just spend most of my time there. So you can contact me through there. There'll be a link on my YouTube to basically a page where you can find all the different things that I do. You can get a free like downloadable guide. You can see the clinic that I do work at if you're interested in that. Or you can just reach out to me on YouTube as well.
Jess, thank you so much for enlightening me on all of these supplements. Again, I'm super pumped that I'm already taking the top 3, but I'll have to find out from you at a later date what other ones I might take as well. So thanks again.